I looked at hundreds and hundreds of cases of successful brand building. And what I discovered is there are basically 26 major sources of brand associations out there. So nothing magic. There's no magic bullet that you would say, Brandon, I've never heard of that before. No, an experienced marketer will have heard of everything, every single one of them, never in this constellation though.
We get to talk about one of my favorite things, which is really how do you position your brand in the market? How do you stand out? How do you make yourself different so that people actually choose you? Excited to jump into that today, but maybe we can start with a little bit of like macro level look at this. For you, how do you define brand positioning and why is it important?
I define brand positioning. It's a very simple but actionable definition, and it applies to large organization, whether you talk about a Coca-Cola as a global brand or an individual. It's really the sum of the associations that the people around you or your customers have of you, right? So in my case, you immediately get, oh, the guy has an accent, he must be German. Oh, he has done strategy, he has written a book, so maybe he knows something about the subject. So it's really the sum of these associations that your audience has of you. And it's important for various reasons. One, it allows you to stand out. Two, it creates interest, right? It creates relevancy. So if, let's say, I associate a couple of key elements with a brand that makes it appealing to me, and that probably also makes it so that I'm willing to pay a price premium for that. Or if you apply that to an individual is, well, I'm associating with this guy a couple of traits that make him interesting or her interesting to me, that makes me want to follow him in social media or listen to what he has to say or buy his book. So it really allows you to capture the uniqueness of the offering, whether it's a person or brand or product, even an idea, and stand out from the crowd. And from the brand perspective, of the individual perspective, it really allows you to guide whatever it is you do. So understanding what the associations are you're trying to build as a brand allows you to determine, are the new product I'm developing, is the communication I'm creating, are the channels I'm using reinforcing these brand associations, or is it completely brand? So if I now trying to establish myself as an expert in positioning, start to produce a video about me mud wrestling, that would create a really different association that has nothing to do with what I'm trying to achieve. It might be fun and hilarious, but that will not contribute to building the brand I'm trying to set up. So it really guides what you're trying to do. It allows you to determine what I'm doing helps my brand association, or what I'm doing doesn't help or contradicts or works against my brand association. That's why brand positioning is so important.
Yeah, I mean, what you mentioned there, there's a little bit about kind of the way we behave as businesses, as personal brands, as people in our business that affects that positioning. It's easy to say what your positioning is. Maybe that's not even that easy, but if you are saying it and you're acting differently, that seems to be a challenge.
Yeah.
What's a good way to think about how to align the behaviors of the brand with the actual, what you want the position to be?
Well, I think it's actually by starting with the behaviors of the brand, right? It's looking at how does the brand typically behave? What do they do? What do they believe in? These are the things you want to try to capture and then translate into something that is relevant and appealing and differentiating in the category out there, right? So it cannot be disconnected from the other because, I could say, as an organization, I'm really want to save the world. I want to make the world a better place. I want to improve the life of my community, and then I don't pay taxes. I dig for oil and destroy natural habitats. That if a company does this kind of things, you're not going to go and position it as sort of like the saint in the industry. So that's why you have a strong introspective phases on, what are the core values? And the core values is really, what is it you're willing to pay money for, right? In the sense of, am I willing to fall over my sword for this principle? Typical example would be REI, claiming that they want people on Black Friday, which is coming up, to go out. Now, it's one way to say it, say, I want you guys to explore nature. It's another one to actually close your stores and, incur a fairly loss in profit and revenue during that day to support the claim you're trying to make. So, if I continue to stay open on Friday, Black Friday, but say, hey, you should go out and explore nature, you lose any form of credibility. If you shut down and close and are willing to pay a cost for that, then you see this congruence, this consistency where consumers say, I believe you, I trust you, I buy into what you have to offer, as opposed to just saying, yeah, that's just marketing BS, that's just, hot air, or trying to fool me into believing what you are not. So it's really the congruence between those two that makes a big difference.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think we talked a lot about the development process. I think that there are some ingredients here that we haven't covered on yet. And I think this has to do with the idea of how you develop influence or clout as a brand, or even as a personal brand, or anything. I mean, when I think about any product that like suddenly was recommended by a doctor, right? They got a stamp of approval, or that some influencer said, this is what I recommend, or you have testimonials, or you have like all these little checkpoints that provide some kind of social proof or clout to a brand, start to reinforce what we are talking about that you're building. Like it becomes like the behavior that supports the idea.
Yeah.
You talk about this a lot in some of the things that you've put together in terms of how you create those associations. And maybe you can talk a little bit about how you do that with purpose. How do you come up with some things that you build this like an association like plan into your process?
Well, I work on this methodology. I developed this methodology, and what I discovered is, and I looked at hundreds and hundreds of cases of successful brand building. And what I discovered is there are basically 26 major sources of brand associations out there. So nothing magic. There's no magic bullet that you would say, Brandon, I've never heard of that before. No, an experienced marketer will have heard of everything, every single one of them. Never in this constellation though. And so the idea is really you can really successively explore each of these 26 sources and say, does it apply to my case? And if yet, how would it apply to my case? So typical example, and I'm stretching it a bit here to illustrate the point, country of origin is a big, one of the 26 sources of association. So where the product comes from, and that can be, made in the US, this is the perceived value. But in my case, it could be, from Germany. So what do people associate with Germany? Maybe a rigor, an engineering mindset, they know how to build. So naturally, you would think maybe Ulli is a bit like that, and I may be a goofball that doesn't understand anything about building anything, but you'll create these associations naturally with me. So, and then you really go through the combination, exploring them, seeing how they apply to your case, and then trying to see, are they strong enough to really add value to my potential customers, and are they strong enough to make me stand out? So that applies there. But there's another criteria that you can always apply is, will this association get people to talk about me? And at the closest level is simply, your consumers, your people that you interact with, but you win the jackpot, to your point, if it becomes an influencer. So I can go out there and say, Brandon, no, really, I really have a cool book. It's really an awesome book. You should buy it. You're going to learn a lot. They'll say, yeah, whatever, you're telling me whatever you're trying to sell. If now, let's say, a major professor out there or an influencer you follow and listen to and respect grabs up the book and says, hey, everyone, you should buy Ulli's book. And I see that, you see that yourself in your own online metrics, right? If I get an endorsement by someone that has influence in my world, my book sales go up. If I get an endorsement from my grandma, nothing happens. So as you create this association, one question you can ask is really, what association will promote people to try to share that information or make it valuable enough for it to be shareable? Something you can consider in selecting which association you want to create, if that makes sense.
Well, I like that you have such an exhaustive list, because I think most of us, especially if people are doing it themselves, which they are a lot of the time, they maybe shouldn't be, they might stop at like the 2 or 3 more obvious associations that they see happening in their industry, instead of really not seeing the more subtle things that people are doing that they don't even notice. I mean, I think the geography one's a perfect example that no one thinks of. Like if I say to people, yeah, I have, I've worked in marketing advertising for 20 years. That may not mean as much as if I say I worked at Madison Avenue ad agencies
Absolutely.
on
Yeah,
Fortune 100 companies in New York City.
that's exactly right.
That comes off very different than, I worked at a small agency in the middle of Idaho.
Yeah,
you know
that is exactly right.
the
Yeah.
experience might be just as good, but they're like, well, wait a minute, like I know that there's a different rigor associated with this geography. So I love that. A lot of people wouldn't even have thought of that.
No. And it's so obvious, right? And when you think, when you hear about it, you're like, duh, yeah, that's so obvious. And your point, you don't think about it automatically. And that's what you perfectly illustrate the point I was trying to make earlier is with this methodology and the 26 sources of association, you think about ideas that on your own you wouldn't be able to come up with. And so it gives you a way wider spectrum of potential solution. And then you can look at it, maybe people don't even know where Madison Avenue is, or why that matters. But at least you've explored it and you've looked into it as a potential way to differentiate yourself.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge, your perspective with the people today. I think it's going to help a lot of people think differently about their brand positioning. Absolutely. And again, if you guys want that brand positioning workbook, head to firstthetrousers.com with a dash in between the words, or just Google Ulli Appelbaum, and that stuff will pop right up for you.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you coming on and talking to us today, man.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks, Brandon.
Appreciate it. And for everyone else, thanks for tuning in and listening each week, and we will catch you next time.
Brands on Brands.